Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the Finance and Administrative Committee for Tuesday, December 7th, 2021. Krista, have we complied with the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we have.
Thank you. Krista, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Harkins has not joined the meeting yet. Mr. Lennox
Here.
and Mr. Stanford,
I'm here, yes.
all present with the exception of Mr. Harkins.
Thank you, Krista. We will proceed. Are there any recommended changes to today's agenda?
Move adoption is written.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. We have minutes from November 16, 2021. Are there any recommended changes, additions, or deletions?
Move adoption is written.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. Krista, do we have an appearance or comments by citizens?
Yes, sir, we do. Citizens could place their comments in writing on our open town hall portal. At this time, at the close of the portal, we did not have any citizens that had provided any feedback. We do have one citizen signed up to speak today, and that is Mr. Skip Hoagland. Mr. Hoagland?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, please proceed.
Afternoon, Skip Hoagland. Mr. Lennox, I sent you all and authorities an email investigation on your conflict and corruption. I just received my ATAX accounting from the town of Hilton Head, sent by Bill Miles to me and South Carolina Turk, who also requested this full accounting on how and where millions of ATAX funds are spent by millions by Bill Miles per the Supreme Court. This accounting internal audit said is incomplete, it's fraudulent, and it's an internal hired audit by Bill Miles, not an independent audit, and only shows the numbers that Bill Miles wants us all to see. His secret sauce on millions of tax funds must end. The recent DMO contract developed by lawyers Finger and Coltrane is also corrupt, fraudulent, not valid, schemed to eliminate any accounting provisions, and assisted by two fraudsters, Councilman Lennox and Ames, as we all know. This entire ATAX committee, individually or their companies they work for, are all chamber members, sit on a chamber board, committees tied to Bill Miles, and keep recommending illegal funding and usage by Bill Miles and other nonprofits like the Low Country Golf Owners Association, Boys and Girls Club, with zero accounting. They are all in severe conflict, committing fraud, and never seen the accounting on how Bill Miles launders millions to pay his $500,000 to $600,000 salary pay package, world travel to China with his family, $2 million home in Indigo Run, $500,000 house in Cashier's Mountains. They also allowing for the recommending this funding violating many state and federal laws by Bill Miles and his illegally operated chamber that is tax funded, and it's a for-profit tax scam. We all know that. You are all liable for scheming and knowingly approving and recommending this illegal use of millions of tax money and violating your fiduciary duties. I again sent a long email to you, Mr. Lennox, and state authorities and law enforcement on your lies, corruption, and severe conflicts tied to this chamber. I am sure you all will be contacted to tell your side of the story. Be forewarned, lying and perjury to state officials is a crime, and all your emails can be subpoenaed. Several questions you will need to answer to authorities, especially ATAX members. Who called you to ask you to serve on ATAX committee? Under what criteria do you recommend ATAX funding to Bill Miles? Have you ever seen Bill Miles accounting? Why do you recommend funding if you know it's not legally used and issued? Would you invest your own money with anyone with no accounting? Do you recommend funding of nonprofits that don't qualify under ATAX laws? Banker Lennox, if you disagree, please explain what makes this all legal and right. If not to me, to authorities. Your corrupt buffoonery must end, Mr. Lennox, and it will end. It's not going to continue. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lennox, that concludes appearance by citizens for today's meeting.
Thank you, Krista. Committee, under new business, we have 2 agenda items. As you recall, council directed staff a number of weeks ago to define a process and a calendar pertaining to affiliated agency grant requests. The first agenda item is just that. John Troyer will outline the process and the calendar, and as it pertains to the F&A committee, our upcoming responsibilities. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, at the direction of council, staff has put together a standard application process with the intent to be as transparent as possible. We would have a process for affiliated agencies that look much like the ATAX applications, except that instead of the accommodations tax committee, it would be administered or be decided by the finance committee. And so what you have in front of you is an application, a timeline. Basically, the standard applications will be due by February 1st. Finance committee would evaluate during the month of February, and whatever recommendations finance and administrative committee made would be incorporated into the proposed budget that would be considered by full council in the budget process, in the normal budget process. So, Mr. Chairman, I would welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you, John. Committee, what questions do you have for John? I think, given the agenda item that's on town council upcoming later this afternoon, John, I think that F&A committee is going to have a busy 6 months.
That's my understanding. I think Mr. Stanford
As a question.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you. First of all, John, I appreciate the hard work that you and your staff have put into this. I'm impressed with the application and the various documents that need to be filed in order to qualify for this. What I'm concerned about is what old lawyers worry about, and that is a definition. What is an affiliated agency? It's got to be more than something we know it when we see it. And the projects that would be performed by the affiliated agency need to meet the Supreme Court's, South Carolina Supreme Court's test. I went back and looked over the materials from the August meeting when this first came up, and we had a memo, I believe it was from Josh, that outlined the test that needed to be met and decided by the committee that's approving this funding. Those tests are the agency must be providing a public purpose. 2, is there an ultimate benefit intended to the public by virtue of the project? 3, will public or private parties be the primary beneficiaries? 4, how speculative in nature is the project? And finally, on balance, what is the probability the public interest will ultimately be served and to what degree? To me, we need to give the affiliated agencies making application, give them notice and knowledge that these are the tests that need to be met in order to qualify for this. And I'm not sure that the application process that you've got here actually does all of that. Tom, I'll be happy to, if the rest of the committee agrees, I'll be happy to work with John in terms of polishing this up, and so that it does in fact meet those tests and advises an applicant agency what must be done. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Well said, Glenn. I think that makes a lot of sense. John, what do you think about
we
tightening
certainly
up the definitions a little bit?
appreciate Councilman Stanford's comments, and what we put at the top of the application is that the purpose of this application is to document the proposed public benefit. And I think Councilman Stanford has a really good idea to expand upon that further, and we will certainly appreciate his input, and we'll incorporate his comments into that. We'll have happy to work with him.
Thank you. Glenn, sounds like you've got a homework assignment.
Oh, good. I didn't have much else to do.
Merry Christmas.
And to you.
Any other comments? I've lost my video, so I'm going to try to recover it. In the event that I go dark, I'll come back on. I can't see Alex or David, so if you have questions or comments, please feel free.
Alex, do you have anything to add?
No, I appreciate Councilman Stanford's wisdom there, and I'll support that. Other than that, I'm good to go.
Tom, I have two questions. I guess John, and I admit that I have not studied the document that he prepared, so I feel somewhat ill-prepared, but two questions. How does the document address out-of-cycle requests?
We don't, and so we left that open, and the committee could address that at another time. So this is really standard cycle, and there's nothing to prevent an out of cycle.
I think we've run into problems with out-of-cycle requests in the past, and depending on the application, that may or may not be a problem in the future. The second comment I would make, traditionally, and when I say traditionally, the traditional practice or policies in the town of Hilton Head termed affiliated agency almost as a quasi-public extension of the government, i.e. Shore Beach Services, Coastal Discovery maintenance of Honeyhorn, and so on. Well, the district attorney's office or prosecutor's office. So I'm wondering, are we expanding the definition of affiliated agency in this document from what it has traditionally been considered?
No, what we're trying to do, and one of the things I would put in there is that, or add to the discussion, on the application, there's a standard timeline. And there is a statement that says out of cycle requests are discouraged. And I think there's something further than that in there. And so we're trying to put this all here, and then it's part of really with the leadership and recommendation of the finance committee, what will be included. And so we're providing a process, but we're not adding or subtracting a definition.
Okay, well, those are my two comments, Tom. I think that the word discouraging out of cycle may not be strong enough from my personal standpoint. And then secondly, is this anticipating, if we're using the definition of affiliated agency in this document, are we anticipating that this will be a continuous supplement or disbursement of public funds year after year for an organization or not? Thank you.
It's just to answer Councilman Ames' question. It's our hope is to start, and it doesn't have to be this process, but we would have an annual process where these applications were collected and then considered by the committee and then recommended to full council.
I think David asks a very, very good question. And I think what this process does is incorporate any grant applications into the annual budget process. And to the extent that we as a committee are prepared to recommend to council the approval of an application, this gives us a structure in which we can do that. It's not to say it's similar to ATAX in that those ATAX grants frequently are awarded to the same applicant. I don't feel that it's necessary to build something like this such that an applicant can build a grant award into their permanent budget. So to the extent that we can, where it makes sense during a budget year, I think we consider it. To the extent that it becomes recurring and part of an applicant's permanent budget, I think we need to talk a lot more about that.
Thank you, Tom.
Any other comments or questions of John on the process and application?
Tom, I have a follow-up. If I could, to David's comment. David, are you thinking that out of cycle, we would require it be some sort of urgent or emergency need that it will serve the public good, and a good explanation about why the application was not submitted in cycle?
Yeah, yes, I think that is a part of my thought. But secondly, I think to put some real teeth in this, it might require, and this is for council's consideration, obviously, a supermajority. I mean, I really think that we as a council get into hot water when we're put in a position, out of cycle requests. They're all legitimate, they're all painful, and yet it is a extraordinary request that should be avoided. So
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, John. The second agenda item under new business is the monthly update of the town of Hilton Head Island financials. And again, if in trying to restore my video, I'm lost, I'll be back as quickly as I can. John.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me share my screen, and I have a few prepared comments. Okay, here's our 5 months ending November report. Key issues: we're continuing to monitor revenues, we're continuing to control expenditures, continuing to adjust as necessary. So those are common themes that we had since the pandemic started, and so far so good. These measures are working. The pandemic is still not over, but I can conclude with keep up the good work. So that's my intro. I always like to recognize town council's previous actions that certainly helped us weather this particular storm, to build reserves and diversify the revenue streams. And so that has certainly helped the town in its operations. November is normally a low collection month, but if you look here on the right-hand side of the graph, 2022 is better than the last 3 years. And so a lower collection month, but better than the last 3 years. So it's a good start to the month. I just put in this graphic here. We got actual that go through November, and yet there's a lot to go, and you can see how tall the future months are. And so we can see our property tax collections and others yet to go. So we've got a good start to the year, but that's more of the. We look at our year-to-date numbers. Our year-to-date continue to be better than the last 3 years. November still better than all 3 of the last 2 years. So we're happy to report. Property taxes standing out really, really strong compared to last year. But you'll recall last year there was a delay at the county side on the issuance of the tax bills, and so that really showed up in last year's property tax collections, which was a temporary thing. And we certainly are happy to report that property tax bills that have successfully gone out and are successfully collecting property taxes. So it's happy to report that. Property taxes, though, if you look at the first 5 months on property taxes, just barely show up on the chart, and then December, January, February, you really see the vast majority of the property taxes coming in. So we're 3% collected, but at least a good start and certainly favorable from last year. Next is this sample revenue, and the purpose of this was back a year and several months ago is to give finance committee, give town council just an early look before we get our monthly financial statements out. Here's a collection of revenues that might be representative of our broader overall picture, and something that we can put together early and not have to wait for the monthly financial statements. And so this is just my list, and somebody else I'm sure could come up with another list. But a couple of things about this one. Year-to-date collections, 21%. Just got word yesterday that the state pay tax came in, and it's certainly stronger at 39% better than last year. And notice the delay at the state level. I'm happy that they have caught up with their accounting and distribution. So we're the beneficiaries of that, and certainly happy to report that that is back on cycle. A couple other things that, when I made the slide, state aid tax had not been verified yet. It has been verified now, so we're happy to report that. Early look, real estate transfer fee, no, it's not necessarily down, even though last year was a tremendous year for real estate transfer fees. We only have 4 months collections in there, and so we would expect 1 more month payment from the county. I'm sure it will come sometime soon. We just don't know it yet, and so we're comparing 4 months this year to 5 months last year. And so there will be more to report here sometime soon. Electric franchise fee, the same thing.
John, can you adjust your microphone? I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me better?
That's better. Thank you.
Great. How does this compare to all of last year's collections? 29%. And so at 5 months worth of collections is only 29% of last year's total, and that emphasizes or underscores our seasonality of our revenues. And so a really good start to the year, but we still have some ways to go. And this chart underscores that. And just from a time perspective, 5 months is 41% of the year, and we are 29% collected, which is exactly where we thought we'd be, probably better than we thought we would be, but there's still a long ways to go. First 5 months expenditures, we can report that spending was actually down. And this was a little bit of a surprise, and I think it's just really related to the timing of the payments of some invoices. And so I think this is a temporary drop in our monthly expenditures. And also I would note that for most town employees, we're on a 26th pay period cycle. And so twice a year we get 3 pay periods in a month. And so December will be one of those too. So December will seem like a higher expense month, and primary difference is going to be the payroll cycle, which is normal and expected. But we consider that November came out less than what we would expect, and we'll probably offset that with December. Year to date, only 2.9% more than last year. Last year it was 5.3% more, so we're still seeing a little bit of bouncing, and I don't think we have a full trend yet. And so we're going to continue to monitor that. It's not a steady number. We'll certainly keep a very close eye on this, and very close eye on the details too. By category, we've got different categories of our expense, our general fund expense budget. Some ups and some downs. Just a couple of comments about that. Administrative legal this year includes former fire rescue IT personnel, and so that would cause it to be more expensive than last year. And the fire rescue IT operating cost is in there as well. Last year, in the public projects and facilities, there was some, or last year in the sheriff and beach services, there was some county parks maintenance costs that were done as a result of our negotiations with the county and what the appropriate level of service would be. And so our number this year doesn't include those expenditures, and so it's less, and it's what we would have expected. On our public projects and facilities, we have a full year of full utilizing the Low Country Celebration Park. In the prior year, we were still delaying what we could and expenditures for last year, and so that also makes our current year seem it is an increase. It is an increase, but that was an expected outcome. We're trying to fully utilize our budget this year versus last year, trying to put a hold on it and delay until we had better information about the COVID. So nothing too unusual report on the expense side. 34% of the budget last year, with 34.1% of the budget. I think that shows just kind of a little different take. Is that last year trying to delay some still, and this year we're just trying to provide the services that we can through the budget. Temporary uses of reserves. I do like to share this, and so certainly we can report we are having a good year. But even in a good year, through November, we needed to use our reserves temporarily while we wait on our property taxes and other taxes to come. Temporary use of reserves. I think this captures it. You can see that July used reserves, August put back some reserves, September used reserves, October put back some reserves, and November used some reserves. And so it really underscores any one month might be up or down. And so we try to keep an eye on the longer term trends. And if you look at your date numbers, 2022 being better than the last 3 years. So a good start to the year. Next slide is how does that fit in with the rest of the year? Certainly December, we draw on our temporary reserves the most, and January is very similar. And so we look for that to turn around in the January, February timeframe. So keep a close eye on this. Beach fee collections, again, November is not a large collection month, but we still are ahead of last year. And so we're a strong collection year to date with beach fees. Hospitalities, that was hit the hardest with the onset of the COVID, and it's since bounced back for all of 2021. And yet, if you look at the 2022 fiscal year, every single month is better than last year. So certainly a really good start for hospitality tax collections. You can see year to date better than the last 2 years, and last year turned out to be a good year too. So questions from last month, an update on the business license, any unfavorable trends, reserve balances, what level is enough, and when should council act? And so we'll talk about each one of those. Business license office, certainly busy time of year, a whole host of applications, whole host of renewals, updates on software, working closely with 130 property management companies. And so we have over 2,000 new business license accounts. And so every one of these statistics are these can be about business work. And there's my other comment. Yes, we're taking more every single day. Any unfavorable trends, and so Councilman Brown, thank you for the question. I have to put a little bit of my own personal bias in this. We started out with this as just a financial update. A budget was passed at the start of COVID, but certainly being very thoughtful and careful about monitoring the budget. And that was kind of the first sense of, okay, we have a budget, but are we going to make it? And so since then, I've kind of tried to send that message that yes, we're going to make it. But sometimes, thanks for the comment, is there any bad news to talk about? And so thank you for the question. Yes, there is. Interest rates since the pandemic have gone down. You can see the chart. Here's the last couple of years, and it's significant. And so how does that, we have generally just put our money into the local government investment pool run by the state, certainly safe and also liquid. So it's it helps twofold. And so while we were still working through the pandemic, we wanted to be as available as possible with our investments, but there was a cost to that, and the cost to that was the drop in interest rates, and then certainly the drop in interest rates is market driven, but our collections numbers are certainly down. Hopefully we'll do better this year, but it's an offset to, we report some good numbers on other revenue items. Interest earnings are less, they're going to continue to be less, and interest rates are not going up, at least not yet. Any other unfavorable trends? Well, last month I talked about stormwater and how they're more fully utilizing their budget. What we see here, there's a flip side to that. And so as expenses were caught up with revenue, as really the stormwater folks had planned, spec'd out, bid out, and implemented bids to fully utilize the stormwater budget, and that's a success. That means more work is being done on behalf. Okay. More work is being done on behalf of your dollars are being put to work. There's less to be left over. So you can look at how much is left over to use in future years. It's a place that we could draw from for previous budgets, and what we'll see now is that there's going to be less left over. I also think that's going to be a little snapshot of our larger budget too. And so in the last couple of years, we're purposefully holding back on our spending, and now it's more the expectation is that to go and do and provide the services and improvements that are afforded in the budget. And so you'll see less on the carry forward side, and we can consider that a success as these dollars are being put to work as directed by council. Reserve balances, how much is enough? General fund policy, town council in 2018 raised our policy just recently. And so I think in 2018 was just recently. And so that was action by town council. If you convert that to dollars, that would increase each year. And so you can also see that these actual is comfortably above policy. And so I think one of the things that we had last month is a question by Councilman Ames, and thank you for that, is that our policy says here's our range, and we're above that policy, and so we can certainly have a conversation about that. And I think, yes, your comments are well taken, is that it needs to be part of our normal budget process, that where should we be? And I think that's a real discussion that we need to have as a council, and as staff, then we try to execute town council's policy. So thank you for the question. And our rating agencies, they look at this, and they look at one of the things that they do look at is that they look at really, I've got a 10-year window here, and our rating agencies like to look at that way too. And so I just add that out as a point of reference. Reserve balances, how much is enough? Part of the discussion should be how much will we need, and have a collective agreement on what it is we're trying to fund. And so I think that's a really healthy discussion, and something that we can most certainly add to the normal budget discussions. Is just a reminder, what would we like to pay for, what do we want to be ready for, how much would we like to have ready in case we need to deploy. And I think that's a really important question, since people plan and need to include these discussions into our budget this year. A couple of things that happened. I just started out a list. It's like, okay, well, what happened in the last couple of years? Well, we have our normal seasonality of cash flows, which we're documenting earlier. We have had a hurricane, we have had a pandemic, we lost interest earnings, property taxes were delayed. There was a different jurisdiction that had a fee challenged in court, but it was a similar fee to what we had. So all these different things might happen, and it can be a part of our collective discussion, collective decision making as far as where would we like to position ourselves in the future. And so hopefully not all of this happens at one time. A couple of reference points. Hurricane Matthew cost $57 million. How would we do that if that happened again today? Thankfully, we have just finished with our hurricane season for the year, so we can be appreciative that we have moved on for this year. We do have $33 million in our natural disaster fund. We do have $25 million in our general fund balance, and beach fee reserves of 13. So funds available if needed to be called, $73 million. And so could we pay for another Matthew? Yes, we could.
Without borrowing.
Without borrowing. Yes, that's true. Without borrowing. I add the question, how much would a Hurricane Matthew cost today? And everything seems to be more than what it was in 2016, 2017. And so our expectations is that even with the same amount of damage, it would be more expensive. But this is what we can do without borrowing. And so I think that's a good reference point, is can we pay for another Matthew? Yes, we're ready to pay for another Matthew today. After Hurricane Matthew, there was a couple of different things that we utilized for our borrowing. We borrowed for our capital plan, we borrowed for temporarily on our FEMA reimbursements, and a couple other things. And so our borrowing capacity dropped immediately after Matthew. The green line here is our legal debt limit. The yellow line is our town council policy debt limit, which is something less than what our legal limit is. And so town council has agreed and made a policy that we will utilize less than what is legally available. And you can see from 2018 to 2021, small steps forward in these numbers. And so as we pay off our debt each year, then those numbers increase. Another way that I like to look at this is if we were to put together our general fund, disaster fund, plus our borrowing capacity, what would that look like over time? And so since Hurricane Matthew in 2017, we've made progress every single year. And so I look at this and I think that Councilman Ames, thank you for the question again, is that my focus has been, are we able to successfully manage and operate a budget this year? And are we doing better than last year? And that we've brought this out to a longer time frame. And so thank you for that. We step back, take a look, and we'll compare, we add in, well, how were we before Matthew? And you can see that we 5 years of progress, but 5 years of steady progress. And now we're a little better than where we were pre-Matthew in this measure. So I think this is another indicator that we can have a good discussion this year about the appropriate levels. So we're happy to report this is good news, and it'll be a healthy discussion where it should be. So we say, when should the town council consider acting? And I think it's really important. I think that's a super important question. And so I do add just a little bit of an analogy here, a football analogy for fun. Here's our AP preseason rankings of our college football teams. Here's the list. And if you compare that list to most recently, we know that 12 teams that were on the list before are no longer in the top 20. And so part of what I'm trying to communicate is that a lot can happen during the year. And so I would suggest that the council would take an annual look and annual and longer term in our focus when we start talking about all of these numbers. And so the longer perspective, the better, I think. So what does all this mean? What are we going to continue to do? I'll keep giving these updates. Town council is going to continue to be informed. Town council will help facilitate any responses if needed. So far, so good. And we will add a review of the needs, because I think we should have a discussion about how much do we want to plan for as uncertainties, disasters, what might happen. I think we need to add this into our policy discussion as part of the budget. And so we'll put this into this year's discussions. And then once we get direction from council, we can certainly make that a part of the budget proposal. And so we will certainly listen to town council's guidance. Mr. Chairman, that's my report for the moment, and I would certainly welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you, John. And I want to acknowledge Councilwoman Tammy Becker has joined us, not as an alternate this time, as a committee member to replace Bill Harkins this afternoon. Committee, what questions or comments do you have for John on the financials?
I have a question, Councilman Lennox. John, thank you for the very thorough report. Thank you for getting it to us ahead of time also to review. And you've really given us a chance to, excuse me, deepen our thinking here. The slide that illustrates the interest earning decline. I know you mentioned that you're hoping that we will see some recovery there. Just curious to know if that affects our future budgets or ratings.
Yes, yes, it does. One, we've got a little bit different strategy And so our options, we certainly are limited by state law. We're limited by town policy on what we're allowed to invest, and we'll make that a part of our annual budget discussion. But we've got an updated strategy beyond the LGIP. The LGIP is certainly served the town very, very well. We're going to continue to use that every single day, but we won't exclusively use that. And I think we're going to see our numbers move up, but move up small steps and not big steps like they came down. And the coming down is really market driven. And I think we can offset that to some extent. However, I think to address your question is this going to impact our budget? And yes and no. One, we dropped our expected earnings in our budget, so we're expecting less in anticipation of these rates continuing to be lower. But in the long term, if we're collecting less, then in the long term, we'll be able to spend less. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And thank you for that, John. And I'm glad you're going to incorporate that into our discussions as we get into budget season. It just it really highlights the fact that we looking for alternative revenue streams is important to subsequent years moving forward. So thank you for bringing that piece forward to us.
Let me follow up on Alex. John, what kind of average balances do you have with them?
It depends on the time of the year. And so, yeah, let me do I'll include that in my report next month. How about that? And I'll have actuals instead of just, from my memory. I feel better about having a spreadsheet instead of just what I think.
Okay, that's Alex, that's something we're really going to have to look at closely as the upcoming budget process starts. Those interest earnings off of investments have fallen off the table. Other questions or comments? John, I noticed that the real estate transfer fee year to date is off about $600,000 from last year. My initial reaction to that was that, the real estate boom is over. But after having spoken with some realtors that were very current, they suggest that it's not that the real estate market is turning, it's just that there is no supply to match the increased demand. Either way, it's a harbinger of perhaps less revenue coming from the transfer fees. If that's the case, that's another revenue source that we'll have to closely look at and make some sort of forecast for 2022-23 upcoming.
Absolutely.
Along the same lines as it pertains to the transfer fee, I see in the strategic plan that we're going to be reviewing and moving on in council later this afternoon. That's one of the strategies, and that strategy, John, I think has been assigned to F&A committee as it pertains to exploring the renewal of the fee.
Yes, and so 2025 is scheduled to sunset unless action is taken by council. And there has been some discussion to possibly expand the definition of allowable costs, and that'll be all part of the discussion is what should be allowed in the usage of the real estate transfer fee.
Okay. Okay, any other comments?
I have a comment. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
John, first, I would say pleasantly surprised to see that you have 95% compliance with the new license requirements. That's extraordinary to me, that people have cooperated that way. And I think it's because your office has made the process so clear that they can't come in and start to raise difficulties about it. So that's a comment and a pat on the back. The points that you've made here about our disaster reserves, I guess that will be a final discussion that we will get into in the budget. But I think in preparation for that, it would be very worthwhile to make contact with the contractors and providers that actually provided those services to the town during Matthew and get their current rates so that we can know whether it's gone up by 5% or 15% or 20%. I think that will give us some concrete data, acknowledging that data is always fluctuating, but I think it would be very useful to have that. Unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to review your presentation beforehand, so those are my comments at this point. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Yeah, we will most certainly get in touch with the contractors and the current rates, and it needs to be a part of the discussion. And I can certainly be appreciative and thankful that we're in a position to be able to have this kind of discussion. So,
John, do we have an ongoing agreement with Crowder Gulf?
we do. We do, and that's one of the ways that the town was certainly well served, that there was a contract in place so that even before the hurricane happened, is that we're coordinating with the contractors to be ready in case it does hit. And so that served the town very, very well.
Is fee a part of that agreement?
We don't pay any ongoing, and so we have this contractual relationship, and we're only billed in case of an event, or if we ask them to stage in anticipation of an event. So if we think a hurricane is on the way and we ask them to stage and be ready to respond, then there will be a charge, but there's no ongoing charge.
And you
Just
did
to have
that
the
in
contract.
2016.
That was in place before Matthew, and so that certainly served the town well.
Excellent. David?
Yes, thank you. John, I'm always impressed. You always seem to have answers for every question that are fired at you. Very impressive. I also think I heard you correctly when you said that on the real estate transfer fee, the 2022 numbers were just for 4 months, whereas the 2021 numbers were for 5 months. And in 2021, it was about 2.4 million divided by 5 months is basically the same number that we're down in your numbers for 2022. Am I reading that correctly?
You are reading that correctly. Yes.
All right. So one might anticipate that the next time we look at your numbers, that will be even with last year.
Yeah, and I think that's what we want to have is you're making an apples to apples comparison, and yes, we hope to have an apples to apples comparison. Yes.
All right. Thank you. In the reserve fund discussion, you showed a graph that indicated that the total reserves in 2016 and reserves in 2021 were basically the same, but that we have an upward trend since 2017. Would you anticipate that trend would increase, all things being considered?
One of the things that, and that's an excellent question. Assume that our budget is break even. We're going to retire $16 million of debt this year, and that's scheduled through the budget. And so we improve our financial position by making our annual principal payments. And not all of that, some of that is special revenue debt, but Yes, we anticipate that to improve each year.
Okay, so if you look at the reserve amount, it basically has three categories as you described it. One was emergency, one was unforeseen, and the other is regular. If you look at the 73 million that we have in place today, there's 34 in emergency, 13 in beach, and 25 in the general fund. Is it possible that the finance committee and the council would be able to look at emergency and beach, which are somewhat longer term, and put those in a different kind of investment that would gain greater interest?
Absolutely. I think, yes, I agree all of that. The beach was set aside in anticipation of a beach renourishment in 2025 or so. And so that's even longer term. And then the emergency, it's really a 6 months on, 6 months off on hurricane season. And so rather than a daily deposit, we could look at a 6-month time frame on emergency. And so I agree with both of your comments.
Okay, I think that's just something that maybe the finance committee can look into and explore what might increase revenues in that area. Just generally speaking, though, I would be anticipating that interest rates would be going up. So maturity would be an issue there too. If we can anticipate continuing an increase in reserve fund, then the question in my mind becomes, do you continue to increase the reserve fund, or do you try to advance some of the strategic initiatives to utilize that money and benefit the community in a quicker way? Again, just a conceptual question for the committee.
And that really is the issue on reserve management. At what point do you have enough? And there's no clear answer to that. But Tom, the challenge we have is, what is it, Act 418, or what's the number for the act that prohibits us to increase? 389. What is it? 389. Okay. Act 3889 creates another dimension of that consideration. Yep. It limits us. You're absolutely right. Any other questions for John? Tammy? Tammy, you're muted.
Thanks for reminding me. Just one quick comment and one question. First of all, as always, it was a great presentation. The information being sent ahead of time made it easy. I don't want to say easier to follow, because you're always easy to follow, but it was nice to have, and thank you for doing that. My question has to do with the business licenses. I see that we have over 2,000 new property rental business license accounts. Is there, and it doesn't have to be now, so if you don't have it at your hands, or if there's a better place to find it, let me know. Just a full tally of these new 2,000 in addition to what previously existed, for a total that we could get.
Yeah, we'll bring an estimate as we get to the next couple of weeks. We're furiously trying to get everybody signed up, and so I think we would have better numbers next month.
Okay, that's fine. I think it's an important number for other matters, and I appreciate getting that. Thank you.
That certainly is the right question to ask, Tammy, as that represents unbudgeted, unexpected revenue as a result of the change of state law. John, thank you very much. I feel really good about this monthly presentation and allowing this committee to track the trends and try to get ahead as much as we possibly can. Is there any other business to come before this committee? If there is none, this is our last regularly scheduled meeting. Merry Christmas to everyone, and expect some special meetings between now and year end. We stand adjourned.